Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah shir. We're holding in Mishnah Berurah Chelik Gimel, and in Mirz Hashem, in today's shir, we will be learning Daf Tez Zayin Amud Beis. We pick up today on Daf Tez Zayin Amud Aleph with a brand new Siman, Siman Reish Nun Aleph, Shaloi Lasos melachah be'erev Shabbos min hamincha ulamayla, the Isser to perform melachah, and we'll see exactly what that means after the Zman hamincha, and we'll have to define that as well, and later uboy seifim, and here we have two seifim. Our learning today should be a schos for Achenu Kol Beis Yisrael hanesunim batzara ubashivya ha'imdim bein bayam ubein bayabasha hamakim yirachem aleihem v'yotziei mitzara l'rvacha me'afelo la'oiro mishibud l'geula hashta ba'agolo v'zman kariv v'noimar amen. Says the Mechaber, bottom line, Tez Zayin Amud Aleph, Siman Reish Nun Aleph, Sif Aleph. Ha'iseh melachah be'erev Shabbos min hamincha ulamayla. If somebody does melachah on Erev Shabbos from the Zman of Mincha and going forward, later than the Zman hamincha, einoi royeh siman bracha, he's not going to see a siman bracha from that melachah. Now, what do we mean when we say min hamincha ulamayla? We know that we have two zmanim that we refer to as mincha. We have mincha gedola and mincha ketana. Mincha gedola is a half an hour after chatzos. That's the earliest time that you're allowed to daven mincha. So mincha gedola is a half an hour after chatzos, very early in the day. Then we have mincha ketana. Mincha ketana is 2.5 hours before shkia, and that's referred to as mincha ketana. Obviously, it's quite a bit later in the day. So when we say that there's a prohibition to perform melachah on Erev Shabbos, what are we speaking about? Mincha gedola or mincha ketana? Says the Mechaber, yesh mefarshim mincha gedola. There are those that say that this zman is mincha gedola, and if you look at the Be'er HaGola, this is brought down in the name of the Torah, the Mordechai, in the name of Rebbe Meir. V'yesh b'farshim, and there are those that say, we have Rashi that says mincha ketana, that the zman that we're speaking about over here is quite a bit later in the day. It is mincha ketana. Now, I think we should break over here for a moment, and let's just take a look at some of the Mishnah Berurahs. So turning back to Tez Zayin Amud Aleph, Mishnah Berurah Ois Katan Aleph. Ha'oiseh melachah. So we're going to have to kind of quantify, what does this mean? Melachah. When we talk about ha'iseh melachah, that there's an isser to do melachah on Erev Shabbos after the Zman Mincha, what kind of melachah are we talking about? We know that when we speak about meleches isser on Shabbos, you're not allowed to turn on the light on Shabbos. We're not talking about that kind of malacha. We're not talking about beirur. We're not saying that on Erev Shabbos after the Zman Mincha, if you're eating watermelon, you're not allowed to pick the seeds out. That's not what we mean when we say that there's an Isser malacha. It means we're not allowed to get busy doing malacha. It's kind of, in a certain way, more like the geder of malacha on Chol HaMoed, but it's not really that geder of malacha either. So we have to be magder this a little bit. So the first hint that we get over here is the Mishnah Berurah is Katan Aleph. The Mishnah Berurah says, ha'oiseh malacha uprakmatia shari. To be involved in business, meaning purchases and sales, you're buying things, you're selling things. Pragmatia, which is not actual physical labor, pragmatia, says the Mishnah Berurah, is mutter. He brings this down from the Magen Avraham. When we come, okay, nevertheless, having said that pragmatia is mutter, mashma mea Gemara, it's pretty clear from the Gemara, dizman sekiras hachanuyos, that the proper time to close up shops on Erev Shabbos, who koidim zman hadlakas neris, is before the zman of Adlakas Neris. In other words, what the Mishnah Berurah is saying is like this. He's bringing down from the Magen Avraham that pragmatia is mutter. Now, having said that, you might think, okay, pragmatia, which we're not really calling malacha, is mutter, so I guess it's mutter for the entirety of Erev Shabbos. We could be Isaac and pragmatia all the way until the Zman of Hadlakas Neris. Says the Mishnah Berurah, no. We know from the Gemara that the shops must close sometime before Adlakas Neris. How do we know that? Because the Gemara in Shabbos tells us that there were 6 times that they blew shofar on Erev Shabbos, toikin. They would blow kailos on Erev Shabbos as simanim for different times of the day and what has to take place at those times. And we know that the second tekiah, the Gemara says, was the Siman Liskar HaChanuyos. That was the Siman to close up the shops. And the third tekiah was the Zman of Hadlakas Neris. So you see that the shops do have to close somewhat earlier. They have to close at least before the Zman of Hadlakas Neris. Vayid Bebir Alachol Kabam B'Simin Reish Nun Vav B'Mishnah Berurah Sivkat and Aleph for more details into exactly what this Isser of Asiyas Malacha on Erev Shabbos is. The Mishnah Berurah questions right away, is it an Isser Gomer? It's not really an Isser Gomer. So there's an interesting discussion here in the Bir Halacha. Now, the Mechaber said that if somebody does do Malacha on Erev Shabbos, he's not Roya Siman Bracha. Says the Mishnah Berurah is cut and base, Siman Bracha, what does that mean? Me'oisa Malacha. He's not going to see any Siman Bracha. He's not going to gain anything from that Malacha that he did. And the Mishnah Berurah says, Sha'af she'arviach b'makom zeh. Even if somebody will go do Malacha on Erev Shabbos, and he'll get paid. So a contractor will go ahead and take on a job, and he's working to finish somebody's basement on Erev Shabbos late in the day, and he gets paid for it. So what do you mean? Looks like he got a Siman Bracha. They just handed him a $2,500 check. No, it's not going to help you, because Yafsid b'makam acher. The bottom line is, you're not going to see a Siman Bracha from the Malacha that you did. It might look to you like you made money, but you didn't, because you're going to lose money somewhere else. My Rebbe, Reuben Feinstein, always would say, he used to call the car the great equalizer. How's the car the great equalizer? He would say something like this. Somebody goes ahead and he thinks he made $2,500. But then next week, the car starts acting up, and he brings it into the mechanic, and he finds out that he needs a transmission, and they tell him, how much your transmission is going to be? It's going to be $2,500. So did you get a Siman Bracha from that money? You didn't get a Siman Bracha from that money. Ois Cotton Gimel, here on Tezayim and Beis, the Mechaber brought down this machlokes. Are we talking about Mincha Gedola, or are we talking about Mincha Ketana? Says the Mishnah Berurah, Hainu B'Sheishu Mechza, Mincha Gedola is 6.5 hours into the day, which is a half an hour after Chatzos. O Mincha Ketana, Hainu Teisha Umechza. Mincha Ketana is 9.5 hours into the day, which is 2.5 hours before Shkia. 9.5, 10.5, 11.5, 12. The 12th hour of the day is Shkia. So that begins with Shkia. Is Shkia. So that's, is it 6.5 hours into the day, or is it 9.5 hours into the day? V'asoymech ala makilin loy hifsid. And the Mishnah Berurah brings down from the Taz, from the Magen Avram as well, that you could go with the Shita of Mincha Ketana. You're not going to lose by mi mekel and going with the Shita of Mincha Ketana, which we said is the Torah, the Mordechai, in the name of Rabbi Meir. And the Mishnah Berurah reminds us right away, when we're talking about times, and we're talking about 6.5 hours into the day, 9.5 hours into the day, v'hashois heim zmaniyos. We have to remember, we're not talking about the time as it appears on the clock. We're talking about proportional hours, like we've spoken already many times. According to the Gra, we take the amount of time that there is from nets all the way until Shkia, from sunrise until sunset. We divide that into 12 equal parts, and each one of those is a proportional hour. That becomes a shaz manios. Then we could calculate 6.5 hours into the day, 9.5 hours into the day, in order to calculate Mincha Gedola and Mincha Ketana. Now, the Mishnah Berurah says something which again helps us quantify, helps us be magdir a little bit. What are we speaking about when we say that there's an isser to perform malacha? Says the Mishnah Berurah, V'chol zeh ba'oisa meleches atzmai. The first thing you have to understand is, we're talking about work that's your own work. What do you mean that it's your own work? If you're free on Erev Shabbos, if your time is your own on Erev Shabbos, so now we could tell you what malacha you can do, what malacha you can't do, when you have to stop performing malacha. Avol poil haniskar eitzel balabayis bestam, but a poil, a laborer who has a job, and he was hired bistam. He was hired without any tenoim, without any conditions made up front to regulate malacha on Erev Shabbos. Malacha on Erev Shabbos was never spoken about. Erev Shabbos was spoken about as if it's any other day of the week. So he was hired stam. Says the Mishnah Berurah, a poil that's hired by a balabayis bestam, Issa b'choshev mishpat simin shin lamed aleph. You take a look at choshev mishpat shin lamed aleph sif aleph. Dezmanoi hu samach l'shkia sachama. Then he has to work until shkia. V'rak kidei sheyelech lebeisai lamalis lechavis mayim. He has to stop working so that he should have enough time to go home, fill up a barrel of water, v'litzlois loidak koton, to roast a small little fish, maybe a kased harsana, or lahadlik loyas aner, and to light neres for Shabbos. So if you're a poil, so then this doesn't apply to you. Because if you're a poil, you have rented out your time, you're being paid by an employer to work, and it was done minastam, then you have to work all the way until come out the last minute. Unless there's a region where they made a very commendable minig, that the minig is that's not the way it works. The accepted minig is that on Erev Shabbos everybody leaves early. So right away we see over here that this Isser of doing melachah on Erev Shabbos, whatever exactly, you take a look at that Biur Halacha, whatever exactly the geder of that Isser melachah is, Isser Gomer, not an Isser Gomer, it's not Mamash Shvus, that the Biur Halacha says right away. He says, but obviously this is an Isser, it doesn't apply to a poil. A poil, it has responsibilities, he has to go do his job. Now, going back into the Ramah, top line here, the Shulchan Aruch, Tezayin Amud Beis, where the Ramah is going to help us quantify this further. Says the Ramah, Hagah, when we're telling you here that there's an Isser Malacha, we have to understand what it is. V'davka kisha oisa ha-malacha derech kva. We're talking about malacha that's being done with a kvius. Malacha that's being done that you're putting yourself into it. You're throwing yourself into a job, b'derech kva. Avalim oisa isa derech arai lefisha. But if you're doing something quick, that's derech arai. It's much more superficial. I'm looking for a better word. It's escaping me right now. If it's derech arai, it's much more superficial. You're not being kaveya. It's without permanence. And it's, in the words of the Ramah, lefisha. It's something very temporary, something very quick. V'loi kava aleha. You're not being kaveya yourself to do the work. Shari. Then it's mutter. And he gives us an example over here. V'lachein mutter lichtayv igeres shloimim. You would be allowed to write igeres shloimim. What's igeres shloimim? Igeres shloimim is a personal letter. You want to sit down and you want to write a quick personal letter. What does it mean, a personal letter? We're not talking about sitting down and writing a contract. We're not talking about sitting down and writing a research paper. That's already kva. If you want to sit down and you want to write a chabura, as we're going to see over here, the Mechaber is going to be talking about somebody who's learning and he's writing for himself derech limudai. To me, I'll tell you what derech limudai means. As a matter of fact, I could show you what derech limudai means if the camera could pick it up. So this is my Mishnah Berurah, and you could see over here that I have a lot of notes on the side, on the gillion of my Mishnah Berurah. There's no groise chidushim in these notes, Rabbi Isai. These notes that I have on the side of my Mishnah Berurah are, I'm sitting and I'm preparing shir, and there are details that I want to make sure to bring out. Or sometimes there's a quote from somewhere else, and I want to have the quote accurate. So these are things that I write, mamish derech limudai. As I'm learning, as I'm preparing shir, I always have my pen next to me, and I'm always writing notes on the gillion of my Mishnah Berurah. So that the Mechaber is going to say is that somebody who's learning could write notes derech limudai. But you know what's not derech limudai? Not derech limudai is that I set aside, I have to prepare a chabura. I'm writing a shir. I'm writing something for publication. Now I have to sit down and I have to write. And I have to make sure that all the sentence structures are proper. And the paragraphs... Excuse me. And the paragraphs are set up properly. And the flow is a good flow. This is already a work. This is already a derech kva. So I think that's the same thing that we're seeing over here in the Ramah. The Ramah says that the Isser Malacha is an Isser Malacha that applies to Malacha that you're doing derech kva. If it's derech arai, if it's without permanence, if it's without throwing yourself into it, it's just malacha lefisha, a quick little job that you have to take care of, that would be mutter. Now, in my mind, I was trying to think, how would I give the olam an example of this? So I'll tell you the example that came to my head. Somebody's living in a house, and he wants to finish his basement. He's a handy guy, and he doesn't want to hire a contractor. He doesn't want to pay tens of thousands of dollars to finish his basement, so he decides he's finishing his basement on his own. Finishing a basement, that's a job that you do derech kva. You don't go downstairs, even though I'm laughing in my head, because I do remember somebody who actually did do it that way. But for the most part, somebody is working on finishing his basement. What he does is, he goes upstairs, he changes, he gets into his work clothing, then he goes downstairs and he puts a sweatband on his head, and he goes out, he breaks out the work gloves, and he takes out his sketch of what the basement is going to look like, and he decides which walls does he want to frame now. Does he want to put up the sheetrock now, or is he in the middle of doing the electric and the plumbing? This is not, you don't finish a basement by saying, oh, you know what, I have a few minutes, I'm going to throw in one electric box. That's not what you do. You go downstairs generally to do the electric, you get involved in the electric work. Okay, I'm going to run the electricity now for this room. I need a ceiling box for the light, I need the switch, I need 6 outlets to make it up to code, or which breakers do I want to put them on, where am I bringing the lines from? This is derech kva. Now, we don't want you doing melachah Erev Shabbos derech kva. You're doing melachah Erev Shabbos derech kva, it's going to take away from tzarchei Shabbos. You're not going to prepare for Shabbos properly. We don't want you doing malacha b'derech kva on Erev Shabbos. But then there's malacha that's derech arai. Malacha derech arai is that it's Erev Shabbos, and your wife points out to you that the towel rod in the kitchen near the sink that you put a hand towel on, one side is falling off, so you want to run downstairs, grab a screwdriver, and tighten the screw. That's malacha derech arai. I will say that in one of the Dirshu footnotes, it's, let me see, I always underline the ones that I'm going to speak out. I decided I'm not speaking this one out, so I didn't underline it. See if I could find it quickly. Yeah, in Dirshu footnote number 6, they put in a footnote over here because I think they were also struggling to figure out how to be magdir, what's considered derech kva, what's considered derech arai. So they bring down over here from Rav Nissi Karelitz Zatzal, and I'm not, I don't want to say he was a lot bigger than me, but he puts down over here, he says, what's kva? V'geder meleches kva b'ir again Rav Nissi Karelitz shu kol shekaveyes atzmai lehisasik b'isa malacha. Okay, that I have no problem with. That's exactly what I told you. You be kaveya yourself to go downstairs to the basement and work on finishing the basement. But what's the geder of meleches arai? So he says over here, v'geder meleches arai hu kisha'oises hamalacha derech agav. Something that you could do derech agav, by the by, grab the screwdriver, tighten the screw. That's malacha derech agav. Ulefizeh kosav, but based on this, from Nissi Karelitz writes, shafil tfiras kaftar, even sewing on a button, shalokachas zman muit, that takes 2 minutes to sew on a button. Nechsheves meleches kva. Rabbi Nissi Karelitz says that's called meleches kva. V'asal asaisa shaloi l'tzar Shabbos. And if you're not doing it l'tzar Shabbos, you need to sew on a button on your bekisher, you can do that. You need to sew on a button on your shirt for Shabbos, that you can do that. We're going to get to there. That's tzarchei Shabbos. But if it's not tzarchei Shabbos, you want to sew on a button on your weekday jacket. You davened this morning, you saw that on your weekday jacket, the button came off. You want to sew it on Erev Shabbos after the Zman HaMincha. Rabbi Nissi Karelitz says you're not allowed to do that because you're being kaveya yourself. You don't sew on a button derech agav, right? You got to go get the needle and the thread, and you got to sit down and you got to do it. Even though, I've seen people sew on buttons derech agav, right, while they're doing something else. If they're malumin in it, so they grab it, just hand me the needle. The same way I would just tighten the screw, they would sew on a button. But also to me, and based on what I have heard from Poskim, I don't see sewing on a button as falling into this isser of doing malacha derech kva. on Erev Shabbos after the Zman HaMincha. Melachah derech kva is when you convey yourself to get involved in a job, and it's going to go take up your time. Sewing on a button is not done with a groise kvias. Also, the Ramah also adds other words. He says, derech arai lefi shah. It's something very quick. Lefi shah means it's a quick thing. It's not even lawn work, I would have no problem saying that that's derech kva. You want to go outside, you want to cut the grass in the backyard. After Zman HaMincha, that already I have a problem with. Unless you live in Brooklyn and your backyard is 6 inches by 6 inches and you do it with a scissor. That I would have no problem with. But somebody has a yard and he wants to go outside and he wants to break out the lawnmower and he wants to do the yard work, that's you're being kaveya yourself in yard work. Now, even though somebody will come and say, nah, it takes me a half hour. So they want to call it lefi shah. But now already you're being kaveya yourself to do yard work. It's something that you change for. It's something that you get involved in. Once you're doing it, you start looking around. You say, I need the weed whacker. I got to do the edging, and I got to do the trimming, and this and that. And before you know it, it takes on a life of its own. So to me, the derech kva and the derech arai, to me, the derech kva is you kaveya yourself. It's a job. It's something that's going to take time. It's something that you get involved in, and it takes a while. Derech arai is something quick. Yeah. I'm not finishing my basement. I'm doing a quick repair on something. I'm hanging up a picture. Even hanging up a picture, to me, now maybe to a less handy fellow, maybe that's derech kva. But to quickly hang something up, to me also is not derech kva. Derech kva is something that you really got to get involved in, and you got to set your mind to go doing a job. That's derech kva. Okay, so let's see over here. So the Ramah said, "Hagav dafka kishaisa melachah derech kva, avalim oisa derech arai lefi shav kaval shari." He brings this down from the Arzaruah. V'lachein muter lichtay v'gerish shloimim v'chal kiyotze b'zeh. And again, I'm taking a hint from the words of the Ramah when he talks about the gerish shloimim. And the gerish shloimim is you sit down and you write a personal letter. It doesn't take any grois machshava. It's not something that you're going to get lost in. Says the Mishnah Berurah is cut and daled. Derech arai, melachah derech arai, you're allowed to do. Hainu afilu b'schar. You're even allowed to get paid for melachah that you do. Derech arai. Now, there's an interesting biur halacha over here that also sheds a little light on this conversation. Biur halacha dibra amaskali gerish shloimim. Adifa havalei lemichtav. Chafetz Chaim's puzzled by the Ramah. He says that's the example that the Ramah chose to say that you could write a personal letter. He should have written something that brings with it a bigger chiddush. Da'afilu shrias doi diyoy v'samonim. Even somebody has to make ink. So in order to make ink, the first thing that they had to do, we're going to learn about this a little in a couple of shurim from now as well. You have to take the ingredients of the ink and you have to soak it in water. And what happens is when you soak the ingredients of the ink in the water, it absorbs the water. The ingredients break down, they absorb the water, and you form a mass. So somebody is a sofer, and he needs diyoy. So he decides on Erev Shabbos, after the Zman HaMincha, he wants to go make the diyoy. So the biur halacha says, according to everything that we're saying, that should be mutter. So shrias diyoy v'samonim, or soaking the ingredients for dyes, oit seidas chaya v'oifais, or setting out traps to trap animals. These are melachas that would be asr on chalamayid. Kol she'ein tzarech hamayid. If you're not doing it tzarech hamayid, gam kein mutter b'erev Shabbos. These are mutter on Erev Shabbos. V'chein muchach shekein muchach b'Arzaruah should be men novei adin. The Chafetz Chaim says if you look at the Arzaruah, it's very clear that these things are mutter. Now that's why I have a little trouble with this Reb Nissen Karelitz. You're telling me that shrias doi v'samonim is mutter on Erev Shabbos after Zman HaMincha, but sewing on a button is not? I'm having trouble with that. But again, what we see over here from this biur halacha is these are not melachas. Shrias doi v'samonim, you take out the list. Okay, I need 2 teaspoons of that, 3 teaspoons of that, a tablespoon of that, 2 cups of water. Let me get my container, pour it in, put in the ingredients, put it on the side to soak. You could do that in Erev Shabbos because you're not kaveya yourself for that, and therefore it is mutter. Okay. Let's move on to Sif Bey's 3 lines down in the Shulchan Aruch. L'sakein begodav v'kelav l'tzer Shabbos. To repair your begodim, your clothing, v'kelav, or other kelim that you need, l'tzarech Shabbos, and these are tzarchi Shabbos, these are things that you need for Shabbos. So again, you want to sew a button onto your Shabbos bekisha, onto your Shabbos suit, onto your Shabbos shirt. L'sake begodav v'kelav l'tzarech Shabbos mutter kol hayom. That's mutter all day long, even after the Zman HaMincha. Says the Ramah, Hagah, v'hu adin big day chaveroi. You could also do repairs onto your chaver's garments. Imhu l'tzarech Shabbos, if it's l'tzarech Shabbos, ve'einay noitel alav schar, and you don't take pay for it. This halacha was negated to me many years ago when I was a bacher in yeshiva. I actually had a sewing machine in my room, so that on Erev Shabbos I was in a dormitory in yeshiva Staten Island, so that on Erev Shabbos, if somebody took out his Shabbos suit, bacher are notorious for these kind of things, somebody took out his Shabbos suit on Erev Shabbos late in the day, and suddenly he saw that the seam was ripped, he would run, bring it to me, and I would repair the seam. I didn't do any fancy repairs, but if it was sewing up a seam or sewing on a button or something like that, I would do it on Erev Shabbos, and I learned right away that you can't take schar for it. You can't get paid for it. Now, the reason you can't get paid for it, Rabbi Yisai, is because once you get paid for it, then it's not nicker that what you're doing is l'tzarchei Shabbos. Once you're getting paid, it looks like you're a tailor. It's true that he needs it for Shabbos, but if I'm getting paid, I look like a professional tailor. I'm doing melachah, I'm doing my job, and I'm getting paid on Erev Shabbos. That you're not allowed to do. The only reason you're allowed to do this is because it's tzarchei Shabbos. Okay, then it has to be clear that it's tzarchei Shabbos. You don't take pay, you're fixing somebody's suit. It's clear that it's tzarchei Shabbos. So again, it says the Mechaber l'saki begodav v'kelav l'tzarchei Shabbos mutter kol hayom. Haga v'hu adin big dechaveroi imu l'tzarchei Shabbos ve'einay noitel alav schar. Says the Mishnah Berurah ois cotton hay ve'einay noitel. So, right away, the Mishnah Berurah gives us one qualification of this. An ani who doesn't have food to put on the table, shari, is allowed to take schar, even after the Zman HaMincha Erev Shabbos. When we learn Hilchas Chalamayid. Any melachah that's mutter on Erev Pesach, any melachah that's mutter on Chalamayid is mutter on Erev Shabbos. Now, we struggled in Hilchas Chalamayid being magdir melachah, the Isser melachah on Chalamayid. So one of the gedarim that we always spoke about when we learned Hilchas Chalamayid is a melachah she'ein by tercha klal. There's no suffix that you're allowed to go turn on the light on Chalamayid, and it doesn't have to mean metacheshbin that it's tzarchei mayid and it's not meleches uman. You're allowed to turn on a light on Chalamayid because it's a melachah she'ein b'tercha klal. There's no tercha involved in it at all. The problem with doing melachah on Chalamayid is tercha. It's taking away from the mayid and everything else. So says the Mishnah Berurah over here, melachas that are mutter on Erev Pesach, melachas that are mutter on Chalamayid are mutter on Erev Shabbos even after the Zman. Va'afilu yesh lelechem rak utzarch letzarchei Shabbos la'angoy b'basa v'dagim. Somebody who has, we said that an ani who doesn't have what to eat, he's allowed to do melachah on Erev Shabbos after the Zman HaMincha. How about if he has food? It's not that he doesn't have food. Rak utzarch letzarchei Shabbos la'angoy b'basa v'dagim b'mashkin tovim, but he doesn't have oinik Shabbos. Kasser the Harsana, well, maybe Kasser the Harsana is Nichlal Lechem, but he doesn't have Basar, Dogim, Mashkim Tovim. He doesn't have proper Einik Shabbos. Gam Ken Yesh Shlomer Deshari. Mishnah Berurah says we could say also that would be mutter. Ava Balavachi Yesh Lizar Bazemoid. But says the Mishnah Berurah, without these exceptions, you should be very, very, very nizar not to do malacha on Erev Shabbos, not to do the types of malachas that are also on Erev Shabbos. Ki mashma mikama paiskim, because it's mashma from many paiskim, and he goes through this more in the Bir Halacha, the melavad de ein roya siman bracha, that besides what the Mechaber wrote, that the Mechaber said, don't do malacha after the Zman on Erev Shabbos because you're not going to be roya siman bracha. Yech shash iser bazeh. There's takach shash iser. We're not talking here just about, not roya siman bracha. We're talking about isurim. So don't be kaveh yourself to malacha on Erev Shabbos after Zman HaMincha. Let's go back to the Mechaber here, 2 lines off the bottom. So we spoke about it already. Somebody who's writing for himself, derech limudoi. He's learning the daf, and he has a notebook where he writes down small little ha'oris that he has on the daf, and he wants to write ha'orela on the daf. He's allowed to do that. That you're allowed to do, derech limudoi. Avol, however, says the Ramah, also lichtov lechaveroi b'schar. You're not allowed to write for your chaver for pay. Somebody has a job that he goes ahead and he prepares a sefer. He's sitting and he's writing a sefer for his chaver. That you're not allowed to do after the Zman on Erev Shabbos. I will also lichtov lechaveroi b'schar. Says the Mishnah Berurah cut vav lichtov lechaveroi b'schar. Lachein yizar gam ken a kosev stam. A sefer who writes Sifrei Torah, mezuzahs, tefillin, shelo yichtov b'schar. He should not sit down and write. He got ready early on Erev Shabbos, so now it's after the Zman Mincha, it's after Mincha Ketana. He wants to sit down. Oh, I have some time. I'll write a mezuzah. I'll start writing mezuzah. Start writing a parsha of tefillin. I'll write a few lines in the Sefer Torah. Shelo yichtov b'schar. He shouldn't do this if he's getting paid for it. And meloishu tzarich ato lemezuzah Sefer Torah tefillin, unless there's somebody who needs mezuzahs now, or he needs a Sefer Torah for Shabbos, or he needs tefillin. Or if the Sefer Pashut needs the money for Tzarchei Shabbos. Says the Ramah Vayter, Umistaprin kol hayom, you're allowed to take a haircut all day long. Afilu misapar Yisrael, even from a Yiddish barber, which means that the Yiddish barber is allowed to give you a haircut. So he's allowed to give you a haircut all day long on Erev Shabbos. He brings this down from the Kolboy. Says the Mishnah Berurah, he's cutting Zion. Excuse me. Mishnah Berurah is cutting Zion, misapar Yisrael. You can take a haircut from a Yiddish barber. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Hainu afilu im asapar noitel schar. This is true even if the barber is going to go ahead and take pay. So that means that the barber is doing melachah on Erev Shabbos and he's doing it for pay. Vatam, and the reason for this is, the reason this is mutter is, everybody understands when somebody sees a Yid sitting in a barber chair on Erev Shabbos, they know why he's taking a haircut. He's taking a haircut because it's, what do you mean? It's Erev Shabbos. Now, even if he hasn't taken a haircut in a month, and he chose to take his monthly haircut on Erev Shabbos, why is he going on Erev Shabbos so late in the day? Because it's Erev Shabbos. He's doing it L'Sarach Shabbos. And the sapar, the barber, it's also nicker that what he's doing is L'chvayt Shabbos. He's giving a Yid a haircut, L'chvayt Shabbos. And therefore, he's even getting paid. Because, again, the problem with getting paid to do melachah on Erev Shabbos, right? We said you can't do tailoring work on Erev Shabbos and get paid. Because over there, tailoring work is not nicker that it's necessarily Tzarchei Shabbos. I don't know what suit is being tailored. How do I know that it's a Shabbos suit? Maybe it's a Vachadik suit. So that's not nicker that it's Tzarchei Shabbos. A haircut is shoy nicker that it's Tzarchei Shabbos. V'loy damili tikkun begadim she'asim l'til schar. Dahasam ein nicker ba'pu'ula shu l'tzarchei Shabbos. The pu'ula of tailoring, the work of tailoring, it's not necessarily nicker that it's Tzarchei Shabbos. Ma'she'en kein bazeh. V'al kein yesh li zar m'legalech le'ena Yehudi. But a Yiddish barber should try not to have to give a haircut to an Eina Yehudi. Because if he's giving a haircut to an Eina Yehudi after this man, that's not Tzarchei Shabbos. How are you getting paid? You're doing melachah on Erev Shabbos after this man. Kasav HaMagen Avram, the Magen Avram brings down a very interesting ari that we struggle to understand. Kasav HaMagen Avram, sheha arizal, haya nizar shaloi legaleach achar mincha. The statement over there is that the ari would not take a haircut after mincha, afilu be'erev Shabbos, even on Erev Shabbos. Now, right away, that's strange. First of all, what does it mean, achar mincha? Second of all, afilu be'erev Shabbos? What do you mean, afilu be'erev Shabbos? The whole problem is Erev Shabbos. The problem of doing malacha is a problem on Erev Shabbos after the Zman mincha. There's no problem on Tuesday of taking haircuts. So what does it mean, afilu be'erev Shabbos? Ubiaru kavanasai. But the Eli Rabbah, Matzah Shekel, the Prima Godim, they explain this ari. They explain the Magen Avram who brings down this ari. Ubeiru kavanasai. Damasha kosav acha mincha. First, you have to understand what the word acha mincha meant. Hainu acha she'egia zman mincha. This meant after mincha gedola. After it's already mincha gedola, so it's already the zman of mincha that you could daven mincha. Avaloi mayrish espal mincha. But he did not yet daven mincha. V'hainu deka'amar afilu be'erev Shabbos. Now we can understand the Ari in its entirety. The Ritzana Loimar, what the Magen Avraham is saying from the Ari is, certainly, on a regular Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday, the Ari would not sit down after Mincha Gedola if he had not yet daven Mincha to take a haircut. Because what do you mean? It's already the Zman Mincha. How am I sitting down to take a haircut if I could daven Mincha and I haven't daven Mincha yet? Ela afilu l'tzar Shabbos shu mitzvah. The Chiddush was that even on Erev Shabbos, where taking a haircut on Erev Shabbos is a mitzvah, gam kein lo hayu megalech achar shehigia zman mincha v'lo yispal. The Ari would not take a haircut after Mincha Gedola on Erev Shabbos if he didn't daven Mincha yet. Because he didn't daven Mincha yet. He doesn't want to take a haircut if he didn't daven Mincha yet, and it's already higia zman mincha. The Welt doesn't seem to be worried about this. People will go take a haircut at 1:30, 2 o'clock in the afternoon on Erev Shabbos. It's after Mincha Gedola, and they didn't have a Mincha yet, and they'll take a haircut. I feel like people will take a haircut even after Mincha Ketana. So they'll take a haircut an hour before Shkia. They'll take a haircut on Erev Shabbos. They didn't have a Mincha yet. Yesh Loimar, the explanation of it is, the Kevin Shekorin Lebeis HaKnesses, since they're davening Mincha in a minyan kavua, everybody goes to shul on Erev Shabbos to daven Mincha, so he knows exactly when he's going to daven Mincha. Lo chashin and sheyavra yidei zeh zman tefillah. Therefore, there's no concern that they might get involved in the haircut. The haircut might drag out, and they might miss Mincha. That's the whole problem of sitting down to take a haircut after la'achar shehigia zman Mincha, is that you might miss Mincha. But now there's no concern of missing Mincha. You know what? We have a little time. Let's finish the Siman already. Says the Ramah Viter on the top line, Yud Zayin Amud Aleph, V'yesh la'adam l'mayit tzas b'limudoi be'erev Shabbos. Person should cut down his learning a little bit on Erev Shabbos, Kedei sheyachin tzarchei Shabbos, so that he should prepare for Shabbos properly. That's what all these halachas that we're learning about are all about. All of these halachas are about making sure that you make the proper preparations for Shabbos. Don't get involved in melachah kavua on Erev Shabbos late in the day, because it's going to take away from Tzarchei Shabbos. So in that vein, says the Ramah, you should be memaited in learning a little bit on Erev Shabbos also, so that you should be able to properly prepare for Shabbos. Says the Mishnah Berurah, V'yesh la'adam, lachein, therefore, says the Chavetz Chaim, ein kavin yeshiva be'ezem mekayimos be'erev Shabbos. There are places where the yeshiva is not opened on Erev Shabbos, so that people should properly prepare for Shabbos. Nowadays, with all of our modern conveniences, you understand that nowadays, to make the cholent, we don't have to go cut wood and kindle a fire, and we don't have to draw water, and there's so much that we don't. Our Shabbos prep could be done if you're conscientious about it and you plan for it and you're put together. There's no reason that your Shabbos prep can't be done and still have a Seder limud in the morning. The yeshivas, the kolelim, don't have to close nowadays on Erev Shabbos in the morning in order to ensure proper Shabbos prep. Over Sefer Seder Hayom Kasav, the Sefer Seder Hayom is brought down. Dem Raga Lilmod Davar Shel Yesh Lo Kitzvah. If you have, we discussed this halacha already earlier, if you have, when we spoke about preparing for Shabbos right away Friday morning, we said that if you have a minute to sit down and learn a davar sheyesh like kitzvah, you have a set amount that you learn. You learn the daf, you chazer the Dirshu page, so that's a davar sheyesh like kitzvah. If you have a seder to learn a davar sheyesh like kitzvah after davening, or you have a share that you say, so you're learning it's Torah derabim, al yivat lenu. You shouldn't be mevatel it, in order to so that you shouldn't have a problem with Shabbos prep. That comes first. The learning would come first. Upirish Rashi ala Sidra, Mikri Davar Sheyesh Lo Kitzvah. And the Mishnah Berurah points out that learning Rashi on that week's Parsha, that's called a Davar Sheyesh Lo Kitzvah. It's a Sedra. It's one Sedra. So it's a Davar Sheyesh Lo Kitzvah. V'alkein, the point of it being a davar sheyesh like kitzvah, if you learn the daf, so we know you're going to finish the daf, and then you're going to go home. You're going to do Shabbos prep. If it's a Rashi on the Parsha, so okay, it's the Parsha. You finish the Parsha, you're going to go home. You're going to do Shabbos prep. But if you're learning a davar sheyesh like kitzvah, if you're not learning daf yomi, you have a seder to sit down and learn Baba Basra. But however far you get, that's how far you get. Then you might get lost in a sugya, and who knows what will happen. But if by sitting down and doing your Seder Alimud, the shelves are going to be bare in the store, you're not going to be able to buy challah for Shabbos, I shouldn't use that example, because remember that Bir Halacha all the way in the beginning of Reish Ben Beis that you're not supposed to buy challah, you're supposed to bake challah for Shabbos. Everything over here is geared towards making sure that proper Shabbos preparations take place. Over here, the Mishnah Berurah says, if you have a Mishares who's doing Shabbos prep for you, so even though we saw that a person should make sure to do Shabbos prep on his own, but don't be memayit in your limud. If you have a Misharis who's picking up a lot of the work, or wife, daughters, I'm not equating wife and Misharis, Rabbi say. But if you have somebody who's taking on a lot of the responsibility for the Shabbos prep, so don't be memayit in your limud. Don't use this to be very quick to say, I could run out of the Bismedrash on Erev Shabbos, chas v'chalila. Certainly, if you already did a lot of your prep on Thursday, then certainly you could sit and learn. But remember what we learned, that you have to make sure to do something on Erev Shabbos on your own for Shabbos prep. Even if you have many misharsim, still you got to go do something with Erev Shabbos. Thank you so much for joining me for Limud HaTorah. This list of Limud HaTorah should be making against Klal Yisrael. The Ran Sham said, Yeshua Sefurus Parnasit should come to those in need. We should be zeicher to see the Bias Gal Tzedek. B'mhera v'yameinu. Amen. Be well.